Hey everybody, this is Mike. Welcome back to the Z Motorsports shop and channel. Today we're going to be doing the shocks on a 2013 Acura TL. This is the 4th gen Acura TL, so it covers 2009 to 2014. And also the Honda Accord. This is just basically the same car other than a few more upscale items, I guess, on the Acura. But basically the same car. It's the 4th gen. So we're going to be changing out shocks on it today, and I just thought I'd do a quick how-to on it. It's pretty simple. It's not really that difficult to do. We'll start in the rear where you got to pull the rear seat, and I'll show you how to do that to get to them. I want to emphasize though that these are a shock. I know there's a big misconception out there that this car has struts on it. They may look like a standard strut in the fact that they have the coil spring that affixes over the top and is secured to the assembly. But the differences, let me back up. So a shock and a strut are similar in the fashion that they do mostly the same thing. They absorb the compression. They're hydraulic units, some gas, but they still basically operate off the principles of hydraulics, where they're pushing oil through orifices internally. So they're similar in that fashion. They're similar in the fact that they provide the ride comfort on compression and rebound. More importantly, what a shock does, and a strut, is they keep that tire placed firmly in contact with the road. So they degrade over time. A lot of times you'll hear the comments people say, God, I didn't realize how bad my shocks were till I changed them. If they're not showing evidence of leaks, normal degradation, they're still degrading over time because that oil inside is losing its viscosity, and it's going through that orifice too quickly, so it's losing some of its dampening characteristics, if you will. That's why most manufacturers have a suggested mileage replacement on their shocks and struts. But the shock, even though it still has a coil assembly over it on these, is just that, as a shock. So it controls the ride comfort. It keeps downward pressure on that. The coil spring obviously provides the ride height, but the shock, the dampening forces of the shock, basically keep that tire planted down onto the road. So these actually are, people don't think of it that way, but these are a safety feature, not a feature, a safety component on your vehicle. Bad shocks, sometimes you'll see them, you'll drive by a car and the tires are just hopping on the, going over the seams of the road, the tar snakes, whatever you want to call them. You see the tires just hopping. The shocks are bad, and it's allowing that tire, as the road undulations and those seams, it's allowing that tire to break contact with the road. And the only time you have stopping, basically the only time you have traction, is when that tire is in contact with the road. So that being said, when your shocks start going, usually ride starts degrading, you'll see leaks, stuff like that. But even if not, these are a serviceable item, and they do have a mileage interval that most manufacturers recommend. I've slightly surpassed it on my wife's. Most of them are around 100,000. They'll say at a service to change them. I've been keeping a close eye on my wife's, and there's no leaks or anything. The ride's still pretty good, but I felt like it was time. I've had these on the shelf for, a few months now, and I just haven't had time to change them out. So it has 117 on it now, and I'm gonna go ahead and change them. Again, I don't have any leaks. It's just time to change them out. So a strut, let me back up here. A strut, McPherson struts, all the same thing. Basically, it is an integral part of the suspension geometry and a component. It usually on a strut style suspension, you'll have a lower control arm, but you will not have an upper control arm. All that movement and that geometry is held in place by the strut. It also will usually have some kind of a thrust bearing, because as the front end's turning, you have to turn, that strut is turning. So they generally don't rely on friction on those. There's actually a thrust bearing up in there. So those are a couple of the differences, as well as a couple of the commonalities between a shock and a strut. So that being said, I just wanted to clear that up, because a lot of times people use the terms interchangeably. Most people know what they're talking about, but there is a difference between a shock and a strut in the fact that how they are incorporated into the make model of the car. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll set the camera up on the opposite side, and I'll kind of show you where the clips are at, and let's start removing the rear seat. Okay, so we're here in the back seat, and I didn't mention this. I probably should have, but you got to pull your tires and wheels off. So I pulled the tires and wheels off the car. Now we're into the interior here. Right along the front edge here, there, about in the middle of each of the two cushions there's a clip. You're going to want to push down slightly on the bottom cushion and pull the little, I'll show it when I come out, but it's a little T, so you're going to want to grab it and pull outward. So that will allow this bottom cushion to pull up. Just fish your seat belts through on each side. Here's the little tabs that lock up underneath there. So go ahead and remove that bottom cushion, and I will bring the camera in and show you how those work. And then you're going to have 4 fasteners along the bottom here. You know, one over here. So one just inside the door sill, door jamb. One by each seat belt, and then one by the other one. Once you get, then those are just 10 mil. I think they're probably a 6mm bolt, so they're 10mm head. So I'll go ahead and bring the camera in and show you these latches, and then we'll get those out. While you're by each door, go ahead and remove your seat belts out of the capture clasp up on top, just to the outside of each headrest. And don't forget the one in the middle. So here are the little clips. Like I said, I'm doing this kind of backwards here. When you push down on the seat cushion, you want to reach in and pull out, and the bottom of the seat cushion will pop out. In the middle of each of these 2 back cushions here, there's a hook in the body. So what you want to do is kind of push in and raise up slightly on that back. Okay, now I'm not going to lie. There's times where you're in here in an awkward position, so you're trying to push just to the below and to the center of each of these headrests. You're trying to push in to get that to clear that hoop. And then you're also trying to pull up at the same time. So you've got to go in and up, and it's kind of awkward. So if you take a pry bar, and you want to be careful because you don't want to damage your interior, but there's a small, if you feel up underneath, behind where the 2 fasteners are on each side that hold the bottom of the seat back, just above that, there's a small body line. So I just take a shop rag, put the pry bar on it so you don't scratch the paint. You use a towel, whatever. Reach up underneath there and kind of feel and put the end of your pry bar on that lip. That gives you a little bit of leverage. And you've got to go a little bit to take up, because the seat's going to give a little bit until you hit the more dense foam. But that allows you to push in and raise up, and it'll pop that up out of the clip. So these can sometimes be a little bit of a bear. I tried to do it at first just without that. I haven't been successful at it. I've done a few of these, and I've had to use the pry bar in every one. So if somebody's got a trick or is able to do that in one fail motion, they've got more coordination than I do, because I haven't been able to seem to do it. So anyway, that's just a little trick to save you some frustration. Okay, so at this point, you've got a couple options. You can either pull the whole seat back right out, which there's really no need to, but what you will want to do is your middle seat belt, snake it out around the passenger headrest, and then I just lean the seat back forward and tilt it against the back of the front bucket seats. And what you're after, if you look down in here, just below where the passenger and driver's side rear seat belts affix, there's a cavity. Down inside that cavity, you see the 2 fasteners on the outside edge, and you see the one holding the shock to the, that's actually what holds the spring to the body of the shock. So that will actually go down through the opening. So you want to remove those 2 nuts, and I believe they're a 14mm, I'm not sure. I'll find out here in a second. Can't remember. But you want to remove those 2 on each one, and then from the rest of it is taken care of underneath the car, and we'll go there next. On the back side here, there's 2 12 millimeter nuts. You want to undo those. It's where contains the bracket that holds the sway bar and then also captures the brake line. So remove those two 12 millimeter nuts, and you've got weight hanging down on this. So if you're on jack stands, you may have to finesse the rear suspension a little bit. I'm up on a lift here, so I've got some cut down pole jacks that work great for suspension work. So I just put it up underneath there, just add a little bit of pressure. It relieved the pressure to where I could just pull that sway bar link right out of the way. Now, once you get that done, you're going to want to take the main bolt out that holds the shock to the knuckle assembly. Okay, now that is a 17 millimeter, and it removes from the back. And it has a captured nut on the outside of the lower shock mount. So just go ahead and remove that. That's what you're after right there. And once you have that out of the way, the shock is basically unbolted, top and bottom. So now, if you have pressure on it, you're going to want to lower that, release that pressure. Okay, now once you get that bolt removed, depends on how tight your suspension is. This is still pretty tight, so the bushings are in really good shape. You can usually just push down on the assembly a little bit, but I've got to get a little more leverage on it. But what you want to do, make sure your shock is disconnected, or at least that bolt's out and you've moved it a little bit. Then take and push down on this upper A-arm, and when it does, you're going to be able to pull the shock inward to clear the knuckle here, the outer knuckle here. So you're going to want to go into this oval hole with the bottom so it drops down and the top out. So down, drop it in, lean it out, and boom, it's out. So it's you kind of have to do that in one fail swoop, but there's basically the rear shock. With the rear shock out, next we'll go ahead and remove the coil spring off of it. There's a couple of different kinds of coil spring removers. These are the cheapy ones. These are Taiwan made, but which are better than the Chinese ones, but only slightly just because of the design. I don't care for these, but I have used these in a pinch. They have worked. I'll use these a lot on Jeeps. Sometimes when you're just got that last little inch to go to get that coil spring out of the seat on the axle. But these, don't trust these real well. Just be very careful if you're going to use those. Here's another style of spring compressor. This one's not really going to work for this application. These are made for regular coil springs where they go up through the middle of the coil and grab a hold of the coil and then you tighten it down, but that's just another style. This is a style that is a decent alternative. I've had this one for many years now. It's called a clamshell. This is an OTC. There's a couple other companies out there that make them, but this one's not a bad design. It's just, you've really got to be careful. So the arms move in and out for different diameters. They have these little quick release pins with a little ball detent. So you hook it over the coil, and then you clip it so it keeps it in there. And then you extend this bolt out so it goes down and grabs a lower one. And then as you tighten it, it pulls the spring together like a clamshell, just like the name implies. This is a big step up from either of these other two. So that's an alternative. But really the cat's meow is an actual spring or a strut compressor. Brannock 7600 kind of seems to be the industry standard, but there's a couple other ones out there. Here's my model 7600, my Brannock model 7600. This is kind of the industry standard. This is what most of your dealerships, your big, even your independent shops have this style, probably even this exact compressor. And it's designed to mount on a wall, but I don't use it that frequently to be willing to give up that kind of real estate wall space. So I built a cart for mine, but basically it's going to operate the same whether it's on a cart or whether it is mounted on the wall. So the way this works is you have 3 fingers on the bottom, and so you adjust the fingers outward and upward to pretty much level out the strut. So it sits in there fairly level. So you're going to have the rear one stationary. The two front ones, you can see if I move that one way or another, it angles the shock in there. And I kind of just try to shoot for straight up and down in both planes. Then you're going to want to lower the unit down just below this top hat. So you want to kind of grab as much stroke as you can. So you want to grab this as low as you can on the bottom. Usually, like I'm on the second coil, so I'm just above the bottom one there. And then I'm going to try to grab it on this top one up here, just below the top hat. And so, again, you've got some adjustment. That one didn't want to pull out. So, we've got each one's pretty much making contact. The shock is straight up and down. So now as you compress, as you turn this, you'll notice it's compressing that spring. Then you'll want to get, this here I believe is a 14 millimeter, and you want to get a slight angle, so a wobbly or even also a gear wrench. This is a good time to wear eye protection, because even though this is probably the safest type of compressor on the market, things can go wrong. So there again, I'm compressing that. Now you can see that the shock has actually dropped out a good inch or so down out of the bottom. So I've got that compressed plenty enough. And there it goes. So remove the shock. All right, so I went ahead and installed the new rubber components on the top cap. Took the jounce stop off the old one and put it on the new one. It was kind of a little tough to finesse over that, but it made it. Then go ahead and insert it, the shock boot over it. Now, I like to just take and put a little bit of anti-seize on. I'm a fan of anti-seize here. Just a little bit, not much. Now, snake this back up through the coil spring. Install the top washer and the nut. I'm going to snug this down just a little bit. Back it off just a little bit. Now that gets torqued to, I believe it's 22 foot-pounds. All right, so to keep this top piece from spinning, I'm just going to apply a little pressure. And torque that down to 22 foot-pounds. And go ahead and back the pressure off. Now, when you're backing the pressure off, make sure you've got it orientated kind of back where it was on top, because a little groove, or a step rather, marks up on top here that you want to have it align with, and then down here on the bottom you want to make sure that the lower boot and coil is properly orientated. That little step is a good ½ inch. That will change your ride height on it. So that should pretty much show the replacement of the spring on the coil. And there you have it. You can see where the coil spring is supposed to reside down in that step. So let's go ahead and put this back in, and it'll be the reverse order, and we'll move on to the front. All right, so this is pretty much going to be in the reverse order now. So you've got your shock. It's all set up, ready to go. So we are going to put our pry bar back in place, and we're going to reverse install this. I mean, the shock is going to drop down into that oval in the upper control arm. Stand it up. Into the pocket. Boom, up into that pocket. Make sure, and you should be able to just reach up and feel. Yep, they're both in the holes. So now you're going to want to put that lower bolt in. I believe it gets torqued to 47 foot-pounds on the lower shock one, where it goes through. Go ahead and run that in just a little bit. Just go ahead and zip that. Barely run that in. That one's going to get torqued to 47 foot-pounds. Okay, that one's torqued. The couple of 12 millimeters at the bottom, the nuts for the sway bar link. Those are going to get torqued onto 13 foot-pounds. Okay, lower suspension's done. Now we just need to go up and top and tighten those two top ones to 43 foot-pounds, and the rear's done, and you can repeat for the other side. Okay, moving around to the front. First thing you're going to want to do is remove your engine covers, because what you're going to be accessing this area right here on both sides. So I usually go ahead and undo all but leave one of the bolts just to hold it in place. The car is filthy. We've had some foul weather here, and I haven't had a lot of time lately to get it cleaned, but still, put a fender cover or something over it so you don't scratch the paint. Be careful when you're doing this. Make sure you capture the nuts. I've seen these go flying off, go through people's windshields and so forth. So again, I just leave one just finger tight on there. Then go ahead and raise it up, and we'll go underneath. You got a 10 millimeter right there that you want to remove. And that is basically to remove your ABS sensor wire. Got the wrong gun. Okay, so pull that sensor bracket out of the way. Now, there's a 14 millimeter right back behind there. This is a pinch bolt for this wishbone. The wishbone goes down around that lower control arm. Now you can kind of see what I was explaining earlier, that this has an upper and a lower control arm. The spring and the shock basically just provide the dampening. They don't actually change geometry or anything of the steering. So, pretty sure that lowers a 17 again. Yep, so we're gonna zip that bottom. Actually, I'm gonna undo this pinch bolt first. So pull that pinch bolt out of the wishbone, and then I like to spray a little bit of Croil or PB Blaster or something like that, just kind of down around, and let it work its way in while you're working on the other thing. Sometimes I'll even give that wishbone a tap, just to kind of jar it, shock it a little bit, let that penetrant zip down or drip down in there. Then we will go ahead and remove the nut off of the lower wishbone. Oops, I think I bumped the camera there. Okay, so there's the nut off the lower bolt. There's quite a void over, it's straddling the axle shaft and the lower control arm there. That bolt's out of the wishbone, and it should allow this to drop down. Oh, see, now I hope that shows up, because right here is where that wishbone and the shock, that pinch bolt went. So by spraying a little coil in there, I'm able to walk that down off of there now. And free the shock pretty much of that wishbone. Now, this is where I've seen some people pop the upper ball joint as well as some of the steering components loose, and that's not really necessary, because what's happening is that when that suspension relaxes, it closes inward and closes up this void where that coil spring and shock are residing. So simply, if you're on a lift like I am, go ahead and just put a little bit of upwards pressure on that lower control arm, and by doing so, it's raising it up and creating a little bit of a void. So before you push up on it, go ahead and lower it, push down, and you'll actually get that wishbone to drop down out of there. There we go. Now you can get that wishbone out of the way. Just bring that wishbone in this way. Now go ahead and raise up. Now that you have the shock out of that wishbone, and you can lean it right on out. No need to undo the upper control arm or the upper A arm. You just got to get that wishbone off the bottom of the shock. Now we can go back over, do the coil spring on this one, and then we'll be back for reverse assembly. Okay, so putting this back together, again, you've got pressure up on the lower suspension, so it pushes this out. There's no need to disassemble any of your ball joints, your tie rod ends, sway bar links, any of that kind of stuff on the front here. It's about finding the right angle to get that lower part of the shock down between the tie rod coming off the rack and pinion and the sway bar. There's about a 4-inch diameter opening there. You want to put the shock down into that, bring the top just under the upper control arm, and then it'll fit up through, get it up into the holes, start one nut, reach up over the fender, start one nut, and then go ahead and you can release the pressure down off. Again, no need to undo all this stuff. There's plenty of room to do it. You just have to have the angle right. Now that being said, make sure I didn't just move you out of the screen there. Next is we're going to want to put the shock down into the wishbone. So again, I take, and this is personal preference, I take and brush a little bit of anti-seize down in there and then just run my finger around it. So you just leave a thin layer, just a thin film really, of anti-seize around the inside edge of that wishbone. That's for future, whenever you need to want to pull that apart next time. It'll come apart fairly easy. like I said, it didn't come apart bad this time, but the car only has 117,000 on it. You know, I plan on keeping the thing for a while, so this is just for next time. The thing with NICs is less is more. And I'm a firm believer in NICs, but too many times I see people, they either badmouth it because they don't think it's necessary, so they don't use it, or if they do use it, they just slather it on there. So less is more with NICs. A little bit goes a long ways. There we go. Okay, so the wishbone is up in the, or the shock is down into that wishbone now. So again, I'm just putting a little bit of NICs on the lower bolt. Very little, just a thin layer. Very little. Okay, go ahead and snug that down. And I'm going to put the pinch bolt in while I'm right here too, because it's the shock is fully seated down into that wishbone. So I'll put a little NICs on that fastener and start it into place. Put the ABS wire bolt fastener back into place. Okay. Snug that pinch bolt. Okay, so bottom 17 millimeter gets torqued to 47. Okay, and then the upper pinch bolt gets torqued to 43. Okay. Now we'll go up top side. 41 pound-feet on the larger ones and 16 on the others. So let's tighten the 14 millimeter. Okay, I'm going to go down to 12 millimeter and go down to 16 pound-feet. All right. Okay, that's done. Pretty simple. All right, all in all, you can see that's a pretty simple job for the most part. Just take your time, go through it, make sure the fasteners are all, again, this is suspension components, so it is critical, but make sure all your fasteners are torqued properly. And it's a pretty simple job that you can do in your home garage, on some jack stands even, if you don't have a lift, but pretty simple to do. So I hope this was informative. If you liked it, go ahead and give me a thumbs up, comment on it, I welcome the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you stay tuned for more videos coming in the future. Thank you.